Today, we're going to talk about our first unit in Introduction to Baking. We're going to start by identifying today our ingredients' role in baking. The ingredients, they play the same role in everything that we do make, so that we can always be using the same vocabulary as we're getting started, all right? Second thing we're going to do today is, after we learn the part that all of these pieces play in our recipe, we're going to identify the types of cookies, and we're going to get a chance to bake those cookies. All right, the thing that's out in front of me, the roles of baked ingredients. All right, in front of me I got some stacks of ingredients in the order as they'll appear. All right, today we're going to be talking about strengtheners like flour, fats like butter and shortening, sweeteners like brown sugar, honey, and molasses, right? Leaveners, both chemical leaveners like a baking soda or a baking powder that chemically react, natural leaveners like a yeast that you need to wake up and it needs to grow, and steam leaveners. It's like egg whites when you use a meringue or something like that to leaven your recipe. All right. We're also going to talk about thickeners, the stuff that helps hold it together. Flavorings, the stuff that makes it taste good, like extracts and spices. Salt's in there too. Liquids and the roles they play, right? And additives like food coloring. All right. So let's go over them one at a time, just so we can kind of know what they're all doing here. All right. First of all is strengtheners. Strengtheners are going to be the stability in any of our recipes. In our case, we use all the flours that you can find over on Bake Shop. Right? We don't just have all-purpose flour. We have a lot of different kinds, and every different flour is for a different job. All right. So think of it as very strong flours and very weak flours on a spectrum. Right in the middle of that spectrum is the all-purpose flour, one that if you don't know which one to grab is a pretty safe bet almost 90% of the time. All right, hence the name, all-purpose. It serves all purposes. Right? The thing that makes flour stronger and weaker is how much gluten it has in it. When you get it wet, how stretchy is it? How much does it hold itself together? Gluten content of an all-purpose flour sits around 10%. Meanwhile, a bread flour, something that we need to be very strong on its own, is sitting in a higher percentage rate, sometimes 12 to 13.5%. Even that little change makes a really big difference. All right. On the low end of the spectrum, when you're trying to make something very soft, very pliable, something that breaks apart very easily, like a cake or a muffin, we'll sort to cake flour or also pastry flour. Same. All right. This will basically be our spectrum of the weakest flour, the strongest flour, and the one that sits in the middle. Strengtheners being the first one, fats are the other one. All right. We say fat is flavor, all right, and that is true for a lot of our cooking, but in our case for pastry, fat plays a couple of roles, all right? We'll see those roles up here on my screen. It's gonna add, first and foremost, moisture, all right? Anytime you're trying to make something have a good moisture content, a nice moist chocolate cake is very high in fat, all right? It's gonna keep things fresher for longer, so if you have white bread at your home, right, white bread sitting on the counter, right, the amount of time that it's gonna go stale is gonna depend on how much fat is in that mixture. All right. If it is cut into our pastries, like when we make a biscuit, it's going to make things very flaky, right? If it's rolled into them, it's going to make things very spongy. We use all kinds of sweeteners in our kitchen. A lot of times we just use granulated sugar, but that has a lot of different forms in our kitchen. We have brown sugar, which has a little bit of this additive in it called molasses, right? That is just a syrupy, dark, really flavorful ingredient that helps make things really gooey and chewy, right? You can also use things like honey as a wonderful sweetener, right? You use this in all kinds of savory applications and sweet, all right? But for our honey, that's going to be another liquid sugar. Anytime we use liquid sugars in a recipe, it makes things really chewy. Think of like an oatmeal raisin cookie, right? It's got that gummy, chewy texture. It's not quite snappy on the outside, but it's got that gooey middle. That's from using high amounts of either brown sugar, molasses, or honey. Leaveners are the word we use for any time we need to make something lighter, quite literally to leaven, to lighten them, all right? They come in a couple different families, right? Baking powder, right? I always try to keep them separate. Baking powder is going to say, we say powder puffs, soda spreads. So if we want to make a cookie, they spread. So we're going to use soda, baking soda spreads. Baking powder puffs, I want to make a cake, baking powder puffs. Right? That's how I always have people separate it. If we get into physical leaveners, we're going to be using things like steam. The water in our egg whites, as we whip them and add them to ingredients, is going to make it so that we get a nice and fluffy pastry. So oftentimes steam can be used as a leavener. Steam comes from things like egg whites, and it'll also come from any time you're adding your liquids into your recipe. Right? And the last kind of leavener is an organic leavener, or something that needs to grow, like yeast. Yeast we put into a warm place with water, we give it time, it starts to build and wake up, right? And as it does that fermentation cycle, it makes the gas bubbles to lighten all of our pastries. All right, so that's a chemical leavener, a physical leavener, and an organic leavener.
Can a pastry have more than one leavener?
It absolutely can, yes, very good question. Pastries often do have more than one. Sometimes if you're making, let's say, a quick bread that they want a little crunchiness and a little puff, they'll use maybe 2 kinds of chemical leaveners. Right? Sometimes something that has liquids in it, like steam from the egg whites already. For instance, a chocolate chip cookie. Chocolate chip cookie uses baking soda, right, as one of its leaveners, but also the steam in the eggs helps it puff up. Thickeners, stuff that's going to hold our recipes together. All right, these thickeners are going to play a couple different roles. There are things like cornstarch, flour, eggs, things that help hold it together and make things chewy and toothsome are going to be our thickeners. They determine the consistency of what's going to be left when it's done coming out of the oven. For flavorings, we use all kinds of things in our kitchen, but probably for pastry, the most things we're going to be using is things like extracts and spices. All right, some common ones we use in the kitchen: cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg. Right, think that pumpkin spice we're going to be using all season. Those are going to be in that. Right, also coming in through the winter time, I got my favorite peppermint extract, so we can put that in all of our chocolate cookies and brownies and things like that, and kind of gets them those Christmas vibes. Right, second to last family, our liquids are going to be anything that is causing it to, right, add moisture and help our gluten develop. If I don't add a liquid to my strengthener like flour, none of the stretchy, gooey stuff to help hold my recipe together is going to come out. None of that gluten is going to be produced. All right, I can use all kinds of different liquids, basically going from water with no fat to things that are really high in fat, like half and half and cream. All right, things that also add a little bit of acid and help the chemical reactions in our recipes. Buttermilk is a huge one. If we're going to be making biscuits or really good fried chicken, it's not pastry, but it definitely counts. Right? Buttermilk has acid in it. And I don't know if anyone had the volcano experiment when they were in grade school, where you put vinegar and baking soda and it makes the volcano. But if you put those two things together, it makes acid. If you put this in a recipe that has baking soda in it, it's going to immediately cause it to have lots of air, very fluffy, good texture. So your liquids can completely change your recipe. Are additives. All right, additives are anything that we're going to put at the end just to enhance the appearance of this. Meaning, just some basic food coloring, right, can change a lot about a basic recipe. So if you add a little bit into just a normal recipe into our liquids, we're going to be changing those. We're going to be using those in pastry for doing things like coloring our frostings, adding colors to Christmas type cookies, and today we're going to be using it in our icebox cookie to make a beautiful pattern in our finished products. All right. There's 5 families of cookies. There are bagged cookies, ones that you'll mix up and then pipe onto your recipes. There are drop cookies. We see those all the time, the ones that we scoop, drop into the pan, and they spread. Molded cookies, stiff dough that's formed by hand into the shape that you desire. There's bar cookies, like biscottis, brownies are a bar cookie, blondies, things like that. Right, and icebox cookies, which are a shortbread that we will refrigerate and then cut into the shapes we desire. Think Christmas cookies. All those Christmas cookies you stamp out, those are in the icebox cookie family.